Repeat welcome to everyone, and especially to the two authors of the magnificent two-volume work which we're gathered here to celebrate. It's been my good luck to know Joe Cribb for a very long time, and even to collaborate formally with him on one occasion in 1996, when we jointly published the then recently discovered Bactrian inscription of Rabatak. In fact, I owe to Joe my subsequent career as a specialist in Bactrian because when it was Joe who suggested my name as a potential editor when these Bactrian parchment documents first appeared, or at least photos of them appeared at the British Museum, and Joe was the first person who knew what they were and got to see them. So I haven't known Robert for so long. He was probably in short trousers at the time I've just been speaking on. So, but it has been a pleasure to get to know him. And I very much appreciate the many contributions to the field of Kushan numismatics, history and chronology, which both Joe and Robert have made, only a few of which are listed on this slide. Their work is now crowned with the splendid volumes which are being launched today, on which I will say just a few words, as of course the authors will be able to explain much better exactly what they had in mind and why they chose to organise the book in the way they did. But speaking as someone who needs to use the results of numismatic research, but who is most definitely not a numismatist, what I would like to emphasise is the clarity with which the numismatic history of the Kushans and their successors is set out here in this book. Clarity has not always been a feature of numismatic work on these coins, I think it's fair to say. I'm thinking here in particular of Robert Goebbels' massive book on the system and chronology of the Kushan, of the coinage of the Kushan Empire, published in 1984. I happened to notice, by the way, that it was sold online for $2,500 the other day. So I'm just thinking, should I cash in that's my copy there. Anyway. So Joe and Robert rightly acknowledge the importance of Goebbels' work, but it must be said that much of it is pretty impenetrable to the non-specialist, perhaps even to the specialist, as well as being vitiated by an impossible absolute chronology. In Kushan coins and history, historians and others with an interest in this period will find at last a comprehensive account of the coinage accompanied by an evidence-based and clearly argued chronology. As the authors write, laying out the evidence clearly for when and where the Kushans ruled and the potential implications of that places it at the disposal of all those who are interested in world history. Well, of course, much has changed in Kushan studies since 1984, when Goebbels published that big book. Beginning in the 1990s, the emergence of a huge mass of Bactrian documents, admittedly all from the post-Kushan period, has transformed our knowledge of the Bactrian language and of the cursive Greek script in which the later documents are written. The discovery of the Rabatak inscription in 1993 and its publication by Joe and myself in 1996 revealed the genealogy of the first four Kushan rulers and the existence of a previously unrecognized king, Vimataktu. Indian texts and inscriptions with dates in different eras, sometimes even synchronisms between different eras, have also come to light or been reinterpreted. Most recently, the discovery of a group of short inscriptions in two scripts at Almosi in Tajikistan has led to a partial decipherment of what was previously described as an unknown script, which was used beside Greek and Koroshti in the early Kushan period. But despite all of these discoveries, as well as progress in other areas such as archaeology and art history, there is no doubt that the coins are still central to a historical understanding of the Kushan period. Both Joe and Robert have already made huge contributions in this field, as I already mentioned. So the publication of a work of theirs which consolidates all this progress is great news for historians. And I think the fact that Kushan coins and history is the main title, with a type catalogue, etc., merely a subtitle, is significant of the author's desire to make Kushan numismatics relevant and accessible to non-specialists, including historians, curators, and collectors. Indeed, the type catalogue proper is only the second volume. Volume 1 puts this material to use and into its historical context, combining the numismatic data with archaeological, epigraphic, and textual evidence to reconstruct the dynastic and political history of the Kushans and their successors. Everything is designed in such a way that one can read the various sections independently, depending on one's particular interest at any moment. As a philologist, I was immediately drawn to Appendix 2 on the coin inscriptions. I consider myself quite familiar with this material, having worked on the coin inscriptions in Bactrian for many years. Yet even here I found information which is new to me, such as a variant form of the name of the first Kushan ruler, Kujula Katphises, apparently with an Iranian rather than a Greek genitive ending. Exciting stuff. There are one or two linguistic points which I would like to discuss sometime with Joe and Robert, but this is not the right time or place for getting into such minutiae. In fact, it's the right time for me to hand over to those who really know what they're talking about. First Joe, I believe, and then Robert, yes? Okay, thanks very much.
Right. So the Royal Asiatic Society is a bit blurry. Anyway, all numismatic work is a team effort, and Robert and I were the front end of this team, but there were hundreds of other people involved. And you know, even putting on this event, we thank TNG, who are sitting along the back row, for enabling us to hold it here and in such splendor. And thanks to the RAS for hosting us, which makes it a very comfortable event. Thank you. Of course, as in all books, there should be a list of acknowledgements, and it's very long. Unfortunately, the person who I wanted to thank most, Sarah, is online, not here with us today. Without Sarah's assistance, this book wouldn't have appeared. She is the best of editors and guided us through the process and listened to us and put up with us, yes, and accommodated our whims, you know, and Rachel Tyson copy edited it, which was a brilliant piece of work, correcting many things that we'd confused. And Edward Hume, who was editor early on in the process, but did the layouts for us. And but there's a star there because there's one person the book is dedicated to say thank you for all he's done for the studies of Gandhara and the Kushans over a very long time. That's Neil Kreitman. He now lives in California, but his contribution helping the British Museum, first of all, to employ Helen Wong, and then Robert, and helping us in so many other ways. And so I think he's a worthy dedicatee for this book, and a big thank you. And of course, there's a long list of all the other people to say thank you, and some of them are online with us, and I thank them very much. It's too many to name. Well, in 2007, thanks to Neil, I was able to recruit Robert to help with this project. And I spent a weekend sitting looking at a river and thinking about what on earth the book would look like, and created this diagram trying to understand the components of it, you know, constructing the coinage into its right order and right attributions, and then what can we reconstruct from that. So those were the two main themes. And then I came back to London and showed it to Robert, and it multiplied. And you know, this was sort of giving us the bare bones of how we would proceed. And as I say, you know, We discussed it. It penetrated into our subconscious, but we never ever looked at this diagram again. And the reason for doing this was not just to do a numismatic exercise, but to provide a resource for all the people who work on Kushans. And the list of them: historians, archaeologists, linguists, art historians, etc. And also not forgetting coin collectors who contribute so much to the study of coins, and the dealers who work with them to build collections. They all needed a good book on the Kushans, and that's what we hope we've presented them with. And we've done it as a book because a book is a structure, and the structure is needed for people to understand exactly how the information is being presented. We could put all the material online as we have done. The British Museum, all the Kushan coins are now available online, so you can get good, decent pictures of them and the data for each coin. And when I say we, it was mostly Robert doing it. And the book is also available online. And this structure that we present it within enables people to understand what's going on. If you just had a series of images of coins, which is pretty much what Goebbels' volume does, it's very difficult to understand what's going on. So here we have a book and a database to enable you to understand Kushan coins. And one of the most important things, and something that I devoted a lot of my career, waking moments, dreams, nightmares, yes, as well, to try and get the Kushan chronology right, because the debate about chronology has gone on for a very long time. I think the first conference on it was about 1912, and there've been a couple more since. And things like this sculpture, which is now in the Met in New York, and it says year 5 on it. Year 5 of what? Well, almost certainly it's a Kushan period, but given the state of scholarship that's been going on for a long time, all those dates could be attributed to it. And in the discussion I had with the curator at the Met, he even suggested it could be even later. But it's a real problem. So according to us, it's dated in 237 AD, circa 237 AD. We'll always remember that every date is circa. And we constructed this chronology, and it explains that chronology in the book. And there are still people who disagree with us, and debate is always healthy, but we're right. And I highlighted, there are 3 kings called Kanishka. So this sculpture, we think, was during the reign of the second Kanishka. And the 3 Kanishkas has been part of the problem of the chronology, why there have been so many different views on chronology. And in doing the book, I'll just show you, this is a little bit of our methodology, that we have the first King Kanishka, the first, started an era. The Rabatak inscription, which Nick mentioned, tells us that. And his immediate successors use dates in that era, going from 1 to 98. The coins are die-linked, which means between 2 reigns, the same tool's being used. So when the new king's design is introduced, one of the old tools from the previous reign is put on the back of the coin, creates the back of the coin. And so we know the sequence in which the coins are issued. We have those dates, But then the next king, who we also have a die link for, his inscriptions start in year 4. So what emerges is there are two, every 100 years, this era starts again for some reason. Don't know why. And we have a king called Vasishka, whose dates are from 20 to 30, and another Kanishka, year 41. And we can place them in sequence, not because we have the same tools being used, but the same artists creating the design. And fortunately for Vasishka and Kanishka, we have two inscriptions. One of Vasishka, which says his son called Kanishka has been born, and then the other one which says Kanishka, son of Vasishka. So we can be fairly sure of that, and so those dates are recording a real event, which inscriptions do. And then there's this ruler called Vasudeva II, and we only know where to put him because he uses the same artist at one of his mints. And this is showing you what the die with the goddess on the back goes from the reign of Kanishka through to the reign of Huvishka, and then this god appears on the last coin of Huvishka and the first coins of Vasudeva. So die linking between reigns confirms sequence. And we don't have the matching coins, but we have a coin of Kanishka II, which has the obverse of Vasudeva first, the coin in the middle. This is Vasudeva first, and that's the reverse of Kanishka II. So again, we have that link. For Kanishka the second and Vasishka, we have the same artist again using the same control marks, and then from Vasishka we have the same artist making coins under Vasudeva. So if you go back to that timeline, it shows us that Kanishka III and Vasudeva were contemporaries, because the links are between both Vasishka and Vasudeva II and Vasishka and Kanishka III. So it provides us with a solution to all the problems of how many Kanishkas are there and where to put them. So that enabled us to construct that, and we added into it all the data from inscriptions, and that gives us that chart that I showed you at the beginning, giving you a chronology for the Kushans. Unfortunately, the last 3 rulers, we don't have any inscriptions for them. We know which order they're in from the coins. One of them is mentioned in an Indian inscription, which we have a rough date for. So that was just one of the problems that we tackled. One of the problems of creating a book is that you have to finish at some point. And I know some colleagues who never finish their work because they're always adding something new. This coin belongs to the coin at the top, was shown to us by Heinz Bonds, who's online, whose collection was of immense use to us. Many rare coins in his collection. And this gold coin at the top was seen in trade, and then I hope that Heinz acquired it, so that it's where somebody knows how important it is. It's the same dies as a coin in the British Museum. And the coin in the British Museum is made of silver. There are almost no Kushan silver coins, but this one is silver. And we know it's genuine because it was acquired in the 1830s in Kabul by Charles Masson. And Liz Errington, who's with us today, the great mistress of what Charles Masson did. And this is one of his great treasures. But a gold one turned up. With the silver ones in the catalogue, we didn't have time to include the gold. And there have been several more coins equally important coming along, which are not yet in the catalogue, and at some point Robert or I will write an article about them. Okay, and now I'm happy to hand over to Robert, so he can tell you his experience of the mind-blowing experience.
So I'm going to begin my reflections on this with an image of a draft of the catalogue. This is a double-page spread before we got to the final version. I'm beginning with the draft because I want to tell you a little bit about the process of making it and also the elements of it that still need work, despite the fact it is now in a final form. This section here is about the gold coinage of the 5th Kushan emperor, Huvishka, who ruled in the 2nd century AD. And this is how we present it when listing all of the types and varieties and coins. This is the numismatic presentation. But we don't present it that way in the first volume of the book. In volume 1, we present the same coins like this. Very different. In that chapter, we show the images in color. We show them enlarged rather than actual size. We only show 1 full weight dinar and a quarter for each of the 6 phases the mint makes. In the 6th phase, the mint doesn't make quarters. That's why there's only 5 quarters there. All of these are drawn from the British Museum collection. By comparison, the equivalent section, so that page in volume 2, runs to 24 pages and on my count illustrates 198 coins. So that's the difference between the 2 parts. The 2 different presentations reflect different objectives and principles for organizing the data, and different audiences potentially for looking at it. This page here is intended to allow you to understand at a glance how the mint is organized and what the relevant features to look for on the coins are if you wish to understand whether a coin belongs to phase 1 or to phase 3. It should give you a good understanding of our reconstruction of the mint. If it doesn't do that, we haven't done a very good job. But it wouldn't allow you to reconstruct how the mint works yourself. Right? You would need to turn to volume 2 and use the much more elaborate data there if you wanted to come up with an alternative theory for how the Kushans organized the mint. I'm drawing that distinction between the 2 things because there's a difference between our reconstruction and what actually happened. And I think here, where Huvishka's coinage was quite well understood before we started, and we have simply refined, the difference between our reconstruction and what actually happened is probably quite small. But that's not the case everywhere in the catalogue. There are some places in the catalogue where our reconstruction is probably a best guess at what happened, and some places in the catalogue where I am sure succeeding scholars will have some very rude things to say about just how mistaken we were. I mention that because we have some very rude things to say about Robert Goebbels' system and chronology, which is, if you've actually come over and felt it, even larger than our book. So ours is more accessible in that respect. It's also more accessible in that it's not in German.
It cost £60, not 2,000.
Yes. Robert Goebbels did feel he was overcoming that particular limitation, linguistic limitation, by including a small abstract in the book in Latin for those people whose German wasn't quite up to standard. Okay, I said all mean things about Goebbels. I think it's been a very valuable experience getting to this stage in the book, because while Goebbels' book was published in 1984, if you read it carefully, you can actually see it was largely finished by 1980. Took 4 years from essentially him reaching a final form to him actually getting it published. And I've always understood at an intellectual level that final part of a large project, when it's hard to let go and just accept that everything is the way it is, to essentially realize that there's always going to be a gap between what you want the book to be and what you are actually capable of making the book. And I'd like to say thank you to a long-time collaborator of mine who isn't able to be here, Issa Fraser, who didn't actually work with us on the book, but was an enormous support at a personal level in the last 2 years to publication, which I think Joe would agree with me were undoubtedly the hardest 2 years of the publication. And then I want to tell you a little bit about a part of the catalogue which is definitely not the final word. Huvishka is succeeded by Vasudeva. Vasudeva's coinage is less diverse than Huvishka's, and it's less well represented in public collections and less well studied. So when we arrived doing the catalogue, it was less well understood, and we had a lot more work to do. It was particularly complicated by the fact that there are many coins that look like Vasudeva's, but are not in fact issued in his reign. There are gold coins which are too debased to be issues of Vasudeva, and there are copper coins that are too light to be issues of Vasudeva. Wrong down arrow. In the gold, that's not too bad. This is figure 3.53 from the catalogue, showing how the gold coins gradually develop at the mint at Balkh in Bactria, from issues that look just like Kushan issues to issues that look just like Kushano Sasanian coins. This is the Kushan Shah dynasty, who are essentially a state that is installed by the Sasanians when the Sasanians conquer the northern part of Kushan territory. And initially, they make coins that look like Kushan coins, but gradually over time, those coins transform into something distinct. This is the catalogue section for the equivalent copper. It's not very hard to spot that these two groups are related. I hope the next slide. Yes, because they have control marks in common between gold coins and the copper coins. So we can at least establish what's going on fairly easily there. This is one of many diagrams we include in the publication as an attempt to visualize at the highest possible level what's going on in the coinage. Each block, each small rectangle on the diagram represents a phase of production of a particular denomination at one of the mints. So if you open the catalogue, you can find anything from half a page to 20 pages explaining all the different varieties that that rectangle represents. There in this diagram, so on the right-hand side of the dotted line down the center are Kushan coins. On the left-hand side of the line are Kushan Shah coins. And in there, that little group are the gold Vasudeva imitations. This is a transitory group. Kushans are making coins at Balkh. Kushan Shahs take over. For a little bit of time, the coins look like Kushan coins, and then they start issuing coins in their own names with their own designs on them. However, the copper, I'm going to call these Vasudeva imitations. They are not, in fact, imitations of the coins of Vasudeva, because the obverse portrait, if you see enough of them, it becomes apparent, is a copy of Vasudeva's successor, Kanishka II. But the term is really useful, and it gets very confusing if you try to work out the whole thing. So I'm going to call these copper Vasudeva imitations, and they run for a very long period. They continue to be made even after the Kushan Shahs are making coins in their own names and of their own types. Why? I think probably because they were just very widely accepted, and that mattered to the people who were making them more than anything else about the designs. We can put the coins in broad chronological order because coins get lighter over time in the copper, beginning in the 2nd century and running right the way down to the 4th century. You can see here from Huvishka through Vasudeva down to Kanishka II, the bar charts gradually sliding to the left as the coins in the British Museum get smaller and smaller. And these are coins of the last Kushan emperor, and they weigh only 3 grams. When the copper coins were first introduced, they were standardized in the reign of Vima Kadphises, they weighed 16 grams. So this is a very significant reduction. So you can put the Vasudeva imitations in a rough order by simply matching them to coins of known rulers of particular weights. The problem you then encounter is what you would ideally like to do is find a stylistic criteria that changes over time and hope that everything falls into place. So it works a little like this. You decide that whether the small wings on the bottom of the kaftan, at the small edges of the kaftan, stick out like wings, or whether they bifurcate out like a cross, is a stylistic criteria, and maybe one of those is later than the other. And in an ideal world of typological analysis, you pick one of these, and then your intuition is shown to be correct because all of the other stylistic criteria also fall into a nice sequence. Unfortunately, our random guesses weren't validated in that way when we attempted it here. Every time I attempted to place the coins in order using one criteria, I found all of the other criteria to be unordered. And I was ultimately forced to the conclusion there must be more than one place making the coins. In the catalogue, you will find that I describe as many as 6 production centres. Your first clue that I am not entirely confident is that I wasn't brave enough to use the word mint when I said that. These vexed us all the way through the development of the catalogue. And I think the reason it was particularly vexing towards the end is I know exactly how to solve this problem. What I need are a set of hoards from different periods and different places, and I could then look at the hoards and work out which stylistic elements match up with which geographic or chronological variations. And then I would know which ones are important and can help organize the coinage, and which ones are irrelevant and I can ignore. The problem is we don't have a good set of hoards. There's one in the Matara Museum that's unpublished. There's one at Nasic that's unpublished. And there are a couple at Taxila that have been looked at by our colleague Gul Rahim. But it isn't really enough data. It's enough to show that there are definitely geographic patterns, just not enough to tell you what they mean. And the reason for that is fairly simple. You're not going to go to the trouble of publishing a hoard if all the literature tells you that all copper coins after Vasudeva are just the same thing, but they just get smaller, right? Because that isn't anything to work on. You don't have a set of criteria around which to base your publication. So I couldn't use the hoards because they're not published, and the people using the hoards couldn't use the existing classifications. So I couldn't make a good classification. So we settled for making a bad classification. This shows some more of the later Vasudeva imitations, and you can see that they're not easy to work with. These are the better examples. What we hope, and there are parts of the catalogue that are absolutely going to hold up very well in the future. Most of the bits written by Joe, they're excellent. There are parts of the catalogue very much like this, where what I'm hoping is having a classification is going to give somebody the confidence to actually publish the material they have. And then they're going to realize that, very much as we did when we attempted to use Robert Goebbels' classification, that this classification does not work. And that's going to give them the impetus to use additional data to try and develop a new or better classification for the coins. And a lot of the catalogue is like that. And I want to make a point here that I think is very important, which is in the introduction, we talk about all the stepping stones that begin with the first people looking at Kushan coins and go through Alexander Cunningham's enormously important work, and on to ultimately Robert Goebbels' attempt to create a full corpus in the 1980s. And these are all stepping stones, each one incrementally advancing our knowledge of the period, of the chronology, of the minting structure, of the economy. Our contribution is one more stepping stone on that path, right? And I hope that scholars in the future will be able to use it, right, to say things that we could not see in the data. And I'm hoping that maybe Lauren is going to come up and tell us how she's going to be one of those scholars. Would you like to come? I think we need to have a moment of switching to another slide. Where is our technical? Yes. So we need to stop sharing for a moment. Right, I will let you. We've stopped sharing on the previous one, so we need to share on Lawrence.
So it's that one, yeah? Morris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, actually, in fact, we couldn't somehow merge them together. But, but I appreciate the framing.
This one.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Cool. Cool. Just double check. Yeah, lovely.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here to, kind of wrap up in a way a little bit before questions, the introduction of this really significant body of work by Joe and Robert. And I should introduce myself. My name is Lauren Morris, and I guess many of you don't know me because I'm actually relatively newer to this whole system than our celebrated speakers before me. But I'm speaking actually this evening as a beneficiary of this work, as someone interested generally in, Kushan history, numismatics, also archaeology more these days as well, sort of the broad thing we can call Kushan studies. So I'm actually really pleased that I'll be touching on several themes that were raised already by Nicholas, Joe, and Robert, because in fact, we didn't plan this at all. So I think it's a very good sign. So I actually start then with even a simple metaphor. Robert, you're very cautious and you're very aware of what you see as the weaknesses of this work. So let me extol the positives, right? And sort of bring this back into perspective a little bit, right? You're too close to it. Nah? So Joe mentioned in the last few days how he sees this work as opening a door. It makes possible other kinds of work. And I would like to extend that metaphor by saying it opens a door onto an easier road for us to travel and new paths that we can pursue. So let me explain this a little bit. This is a kind of a clear, diagram. We go in a direction, we have branches off, we can, imagine it in different ways. But as Nicholas well pointed out at the beginning, Kushan studies, broadly defined, has not always looked like this kind of thing. In fact, it looks a little bit more like this over time, not to scale. So if we imagine sort of the beginning of this from, if the pivotal work of Cunningham or the collectors before him in the 19th century start to more systematically work on this coinage, you know, up and through until today, there are so many new things that are unfolding and, you know, adding to incrementally our body of knowledge. But this kind of thing, as a person, you know, getting into this about, you know, just over 10 years ago as a student, is not easy. Yeah, it is pretty difficult. So on the one hand, you kind of have a flow of these sort of, you know, changes over time, and you know, again, the first collections and studies, increasing field work in the mid-20th century, more comprehensive studies of Goebel. Come on, he really did a lot, yeah. And more agreement slowly with disagreements on relative and absolute chronology through important discoveries. But then you also find all kinds of things like this. I just say, you know, make a couple of the examples of the main sticking points or topics. People, you know, identifying coins differently, the relationship with Gandharan art, the relationship with Buddhism, chronology, the big curse, right? All kinds of things. And you can read, even in work of the last few decades, you know, very, very different perspectives, and sort of not understand at all why they say these things unless you sort of spend a lot of time absorbing this literature. And of course, you can also see maps like this, that when you start to unpack them, you don't really know why they're made. So to this extent, I explain in a second. So at some point as a student, if you're really persistent, you know, I guess like I am, you start to go to the source. And I have bothered Joe and Robert many times over the years, and especially on the topic of Vasudeva imitations. I think this is when I started really also asking Joe many questions via email when I started to look at the background material. So it's a funny topic. But eventually, I guess, you know, our colleagues are so generous with sharing their knowledge, especially when it's not so easily accessible. At some point, I remember it very vividly, in 2018, I was traveling on a bus and I got an email from Joe that him and Robert have sent me the draft version of this catalogue. And I remember, I'm sorry, it was so exciting. You know, I immediately downloaded it on the, you know, the laptop and started reading it immediately. And, you know, it was just so interesting to sort of see exactly how this is evolving at this present moment. Such a benefit for, you know, such a great thing to share. And I really thought, you know, play it cool, Lauren, you know, you can't be too effusive, right? So I wrote back to him, "Dear Joe, wow, thank you so much for this. Christmas has come early." So yes, that was in 2018. So this has it's a work that's been, you know, very long awaited, and it's you know, a very difficult and complex one. So it's taken the necessary time, and there's been some tricky years. But I just want to briefly kind of summarize again what this book does for us, and then what we can do more with it. So, you know, in the introduction, you have these sort of three main chapters, really the meat of the book, you know, the frameworks and the aims, and it's made clear, you know, that the basis of this book is about setting up, you know, the hierarchy of questions. So some questions have to be answered before other ones can even be asked to a real degree. So very keenly felt. Then we work through, of course, the history of the Kushans and their successes, but through the lens of coinage production, so minting practice. And this is also done, you know, very much in dialogue with other bodies of evidence. So, you know, putting the coin in conversation with everything else. And then we have the structure and the development of the coinage production. So I explain a little bit more why this is so useful. So, you know, when you read works on the Kushans, even now, there's often, you know, a few obligatory paragraphs about chronology. And I would really wish that we just don't have to do this anymore, right? So something like this in this book, you know, explaining, you know, laying out quite clearly why the chronology is set up in this way. What are the die links? What are the you know, the series of coinage? How does it relate to each other? What are the relationships with inscriptions? Setting it up. And you know what? If people want to disagree, then at least it's clear what you're disagreeing with. So it's fantastic. It's great to be able to use this kind of thing. A pleasure. Another thing noted by Robert is also the structure of the coinage production. And again, this looks quite complex with a lot of things going on, but again, it's just very refreshingly clear to have this kind of vision laid out about how this coinage is actually being, you know, produced before it, you know, disseminates through this landscape and is used by communities. And, you know, and of course, volume 2 is a well illustrated, comprehensive, accessible, and easy to use type catalog, which we can already benefit from immediately, right? And of course, yeah, it's you can start to see, you know, how does your coinage relating from a site, and how can also maybe this picture change to some degree. Another thing that this book does, it also presents a kind of clearer vision of the extent and the contextual significance of the Kushans and the successes in the role of the histories in Central and South Asia. So one thing this book is careful about is to talk about more specifically where these mints should be, pulling all the evidence together, although of course it's still a reconstruction and still needs, of course, more data to support, verify everything, and to, give a kind of more clearer historical framework, because, the Kushans are attributed to so much in our history, and it's really refreshing to be able to try and, pin this more with a reliable framework. So finally, we can work, with a little bit more confidence and clarity, especially working with the coins, to flesh out the picture further and start to ask more questions. So one thing that I wanted to then briefly talk about is about the relationship between coinage and the archaeological record. And I have to look at my notes so I don't take too much time, because otherwise I'll get very excited. So thinking about easier roads to follow and paths to pursue. This work benefits archaeologists, but I'm also wondering about more how archaeology can benefit this kind of work. And so in this book, Joe and Robert well note that this work can facilitate a better usage of coin finds for dating archaeological sites and strata. So moreover, their focus is on coinage production, of course, so this is the stated focus, but they also note that the issue of circulation, so how the coins were used, is another but related problem, and this can be better informed with more comprehensive stratigraphic information. This is all true, absolutely, but I'd like to expand on this a little bit. So all of our coins that we have today were really once in the archaeological record. And so, again, this is very small text, huh? Oof. So what systematically documenting that record provides is context. And this is horizontal and vertical spatial relationships. And this is what lost when coins are decoupled from that record. And of course, what remains such a difficult problem with, informal or illicit excavation to feed trade, which is a problem actually everywhere. So Joe and Robert's reconstruction of these production systems, of course, draws, very deeply on significant sites, some substantial corpora, but most of it, and the important ones, are the complex legacy data from Masson's collections at Bagram and the British Museum, or from Marshall's work at Taxila, respectively, with either, quite absent or problematic stratigraphy, and, more general or more specific spatial information. And these have been, of course, forensically unpacked by the work of Elizabeth Arrington and Gul Rahim Khan, especially these collections. So yes, they're still very critical in their size and detail. They provide significant horizontal spatial information, and they really do shape very much how the production systems are reconstructed in the book. So, they're very important collections. In terms of vertical spatial information, this is really best informed by extensive archaeological, like long-term stratigraphic excavations, when it's carefully conducted and documented. And this is really far from easy, expensive, takes a lot of effort and a long time. And so in the Kushan world, broadly speaking, an exceptional case is really the site of Barakot, which we all know in the Swat Valley, excavated for decades by the Italian Archaeological Mission in Pakistan. And this is really something like an ideal modern standard. It's an urban site. It has a refined archaeological chronology based on, really a comprehensive view of the material, extensive C14. And this is the kind of integrated perspective that facilitates the important recent publication of the coin finds from Ehsan Shahraverdi. So you can see how they unfold over the stratigraphy over time. But then I would have turned just very briefly to the problem further to the north in Bactria Toharistan, which encompasses part of modern Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan. And this is a critical, even core region for the Kushans, as we often say. And of course, here the situation is just more complicated. We face many challenges, despite significant large-scale fieldwork campaigns, especially in Sorkhandaria. Our data presents, a really rich but a very fragmented picture, difficult to understand, and somehow partially published, not easily accessible. We have some more general information, a sort of significant appraisal and the synthesis of finds, but this must be updated and we need to support this. We all need the Slojas and the corpora, and this is really not easy. But moreover, even when we have, somewhat better stratigraphic information, like in the case with Zavyalov at Zarotepa, the coin finds were also not finished in publication, and we don't have images of most of them. So this is the kind of thing we have to deal with. And of course, the picture we inherit is also a little bit confusing. So despite the, the centrality of urbanism and its growth in Kushan Bactria, large-scale projects at urban sites, Dalverz and Tepa, Zarotepa, it's already been clear for some decades that some smaller sites have a surprisingly large amount of coinage. And, you know, clearly the Kushano, Sasanian and Kushan periods, reversal, experience a substantial monetization, but it's hard to sort of say precisely what's happening, why it's important, or how this coinage really worked. So we need to update our information. For example, in the top left-hand corner, the situation looked a little bit like this. And in the synthesis of Pugachenkova and Refiladze, we find the information that lowland urban, so oasis sites were the focus of monetary economies, and Kushan coins were rare in the foothills and mountains. That appraisal seemed true at the time because not many people had really systematically looked. So then I want to mention very briefly what happens when we do look differently in the context of archaeological expeditions. And this is the work of my team and myself at the Kuloltepe Archaeological Project, as part of the Czech-Uzbekistani Archaeological Expedition. And our aim is kind of this multidisciplinary approach to the economic life of this rural settlement over time. So throwing all kinds of methods at it, excavation, survey, the lot. So I can't present this in full today, but you see our trenches here, you see the distribution of surface material, mostly ceramics, just here already, currently under process. But I just wanted to mention that, you know, it's a reminder that, you know, coins are part of our site taphonomic processes. So they're part of our architecture, our infills, our raised floors. We have to really see them more as also residual refuse, rubbish that turns up alongside ceramics, bones. And in our experience, they can be even a century or even older than that deposit, like the other material. So this is a complexity that has to be accounted for with circulation. Another kind of surprising, interesting thing we found, you know, despite also the excavations, we did the excavations and also the surface metal detector survey with some campaigns which were integrated with our systematic surface survey. So you can see the polygons there in the corner. And what we found, again, speaking to these taphonomic processes over time from these plowed surfaces and eroded surfaces, we had, you know, almost 470 coins from over 2,000 years, which is a very large amount and much more than not much Kushan coins in these areas. A lot of these are from the 1st to 4th century CE. You can do all kinds of things, cleaning, conservation, PXRF. And a lot of these, of course, also, this relates to the Kushan period. So you see the overall distribution of coin finds here. This very clearly already speaks to a monetized society. So this is just kind of under work at the moment, but I just give some examples of how much easier this kind of thing is with this kind of catalog to navigate, because you know, 470 coin finds would take somebody, you know, several years to work through, and this sort of facilitates the process much faster. I showed you some examples from the early part of, sort of reattributed to Kujulik Hadfises' reign with good reason. We have the examples of, you know, the Heliocles imitations that are, we have even sort of two examples. One is a bit more worn here, which is nice. And also the transition for the next type related to the Soter-Megas coinage. Was talking about it with Joe today, and he noticed that there is, in fact, it's an overstrike, and you can see the Zeus undertype on the back. So, you know, very nice. So these are some of several. We also have some nice surprises in terms of the Soter-Megas coinage, very widely distributed, again, mostly associated with Vima Tacto, but also from the end of Kujula's reign with Joe's sort of masterful work on this. And we even have these small denominations that were thought also in the catalogue to perhaps not be so common outside of urban sites, outside of Begram, in fact, where they should be minted, which should be a major center of production. So again, some more nice surprises. We have several. We get a prism through the main Kushan kings, Vima Kadfises. Again, these are all issues that should be from the Begram mint, as is the reconstruction. So this is very nice. Kanishka diadrams, tetradrams. Again, this is all mostly copper. We have no gold and some silver-related issues from other eras. Also, Havishka, we can see his reign through the transition of the coinage too. We have, you know, from the early phases through the third one, and then the problem of imitations that Robert raised. In fact, it seems there's also a really big problem of Havishka imitations that sort of waits to be unpacked too. So we have examples of this too, which will be, you know, helpful for this kind of future perspective. I just kind of come to only to the end of the Kushan dynasty. I don't touch on the Kushano Sasanians and Kidarites, even though I'd hoped to. But we also, of course, have examples of lifetime Vasudeva issues, Kanishka II. So it seems that also is noted in the catalogue that Kanishka II coppers seem to be circulating in this area, even though Balkh seems to have been lost to the Kushano Sasanian. So very interesting. And of course, provocatively, I don't maybe include the type there, but the F imit C. We fall in here too. We have several Vasudeva imitations broadly defined, and also the Adoksho ones as well from the Kanishka II types. And so site finds like this will be really, really helpful when systematically documented for finally unpacking these problems in more detail. Yeah. So yeah, I'm really actually very optimistic about how this kind of work helps everything else we do, and about the future of new insights that we can attain about the circulation of this coinage, and to flesh out the reconstruction of its production, and see links even from places like Begram to Kulal Tepe in the mountains, and see, yeah, moreover, finally, we can ask different questions about eventually how communities use this coinage and how it maybe impacted societies too. So yeah, we can be better situated by this work in conclusion. We have an easier road, we can flesh out a picture, and we can also support more things like, more field work, the publication of critical collections from archaeological sites, further digitization, other things like compositional analysis, computer vision, even things like that. This kind of work makes this kind of thing a lot easier. Moreover, we can also start to follow new paths, not to follow, keep coming back to the same debates, and struggle with some other questions too. So again, it seems like Christmas has come early. I'm very happy to see this volume, and please, yeah, join me in saying a big round of thank yous to Joe and Robert for their gift. Okay. Yes, please come up and we'll take questions.
I'm doing really hard, but I'm tired.
Yeah. Well, the opening of the door, as you might have noticed, the book weighs 4 kilos, so it'll act as a very good doorstop and keep that door open. Yes. Okay. So if anybody has any comments or observations, questions, or are you all too stuck? There we are, Andrew.
We have to use the microphone
Yeah.
so people online can.
Yeah, and identify yourselves.
Thank you.
Andrew Burnett, British Museum, who suffered from Joe for many years on this catalogue. But anyway, I wanted to ask if you don't mind looking back about Robert Goebel, with whom I sadly had a very poor relationship for many years. I think I wasn't the only person to be in this category, but obviously he began life as a Roman numismatist essentially, and I'm presuming he tried to apply the principles of Roman classification to the Kushan material. But so my question is, was that an unhelpful model, or is there actually something to be said in its favour?
I think it was the biggest mistake he made.
I thought so.
He had this idea that the Roman mint was organised in workshops, which certainly in the 3rd and 4th century it was, but at the time when the Kushans came to power, it's very unlikely that the Roman mint was organised in that way. And he decided that every different god on the reverse of Kanishka and Huvishka's coins indicated the workshop. But what he didn't, he saw it, but he didn't take account of it, was that there were 2 people making coins at the main mint and 1 person at the other mint. And they used the reverses in a cycle. And so the reverses represent either batches or periods of production. And so with 2 people, and also the reverse dies move backwards and forwards between them. So it's impossible for there to be more than 1 workshop. And so his whole premise was undermined. He also thought there were Roman moneyers exiled from Alexandria who turned up in the Kushan territory and started making coins. Another fantasy on his part. But he did achieve a huge amount. And I always sort of think of Isaac Newton saying, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And that is very true. But we need to kick them in the head occasionally.
Perhaps not quite as gigantic as he might have been, though. But
Sorry. I was, sorry, I'm Shailin Bandare. I'm at the Ashmolean. Again, you know, one of Joe's my academic father, as I say all the time. But carrying on with Andrew's question is that, you know, when I'm a sort of outsider to Kushan studies altogether. But when I was reading earlier works, like, you know, say Numismatic Digest or something, there was a guy called Craig Alden Burns, and he also seemed to have ideas about how did this coinage operate. And are you sort of, my question was that, are you sort of inspired by these kind of insights, or are they complete flights of fancy? And I mean, like, you know, is there any grain of truth in these early classificatory methods who then use their own classification as sort of a historical premise and then try to, you know, conclude something historically out of what is essentially their own creation? So
I think there's at least one publication where Craig Burns does attempt to tackle the organization and gets very close, right? I think it very much comes back to that thing I was saying. What you do is you start with a guess. It's organized by workshops, it's this kind of thing, and you lay everything out. And what you hope is that when you lay everything out, you then see the guess confirmed, or you're able to refine it. And the danger, of course, is that sometimes you lay it out and you convince yourself there's a pattern there when there isn't. So there's absolutely a mixture of that in both Burns and Goebbels, who knew each other quite well, of when they try to lay things out, there are elements like, you're absolutely right. Or as Joe said, Goebbels might see everything that has the answer, but just not quite put it in the right order. And I think at each step, you can only do so much. So no, it was, as Lawrence suggested, quite frustrating at times to try and handle the existing literature, but without the existing literature, we wouldn't have been able to do it either. So there was this complicated process of simultaneously critiquing it, but also at the same time having to understand that however insane a reconstruction seemed, there was an underlying logic at work, and you had to get the underlying logic in order to work out what you could or couldn't extract from it. So all the time through the production process, that was.
Can I have a liberty of having a sub question, which is, what do you, in your experience, what would you think that was the kind of, you know, the moment that you thought, well, wow, this is excellent, although it's a completely unfounded guess, but, you know, like a flash of epiphany, something like someone before you had got it, and then you sort of could develop, you know, from a historiographic perspective?
Yeah,
was there a flash of wisdom?
I think looking at the dice, doing dice studies on Kanishka and on Vasudeva the First revealed how the mint was organised, and that sort of completely shifted. And since the catalogue was put to bed, I've done some more dice studies, and I can show that there's one die of Kanishka, one obverse die of Kanishka that is used with about 30 different reverses, and they're used in a sequence. So there are sort of six gods, 5 gods on the back, and they're used in order, and then they go back to the beginning, and they're used in order again, and then go back to the beginning. So there's sort of batch production seems to be.
But I think that took a long time, didn't it?
Yeah.
It was about 2010 when we looked at the crisis point in Huvishka.
Yes.
And there's a moment when something goes wrong at Huvishka's mints, and we don't know what it is, but something goes very badly wrong. And it appears that the mint is not authorized to make new obverse dies with the king's image on. It can make new reverse dies, but not new obverse, and it has this single die that just because you're doing this very violent action, hitting with a hammer, this die is gradually wearing out, and the mint is having to gouge into the die to repair it constantly. And Goebbels knew this die existed, and he knew that there were progressions, and we were kind of laying it out ourselves. And I think we had a moment where we then just laid out the order
Yeah, we
of
had
the reverse.
pictures of all the coins, and we laid them out on a table that is twice that length.
Yeah. And then at that moment, that was the point at which we were like, oh, that's a little odd. That kind of looks like it's going round in a circle. Right? Wasn't perfect. And I think that gave the intuition. And as Joe said, he's done some more recently since and found other places, and gradually we've been able to confirm that. That's taken a decade to kind of go from that initial intuition to gradually build up enough data to be confident that this isn't just something we're seeing. This really is something that actually was happening. Yeah.
And
so it's not. So there are, yes, there's moments like that, but they're not.
I'm sure there are not very many. So
and they keep coming. I mean, I think that we finished the book. I mean, for the production purposes, we stopped adding things to it about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And things keep coming. I showed you the gold coin of Fema Cadvices that Heinz Bonds showed me. But also ideas keep coming, and I always think of stuff, the circle. It's, you interrogate. When you get back to the beginning, you start again, because now you've got all that information, you can carry on, and it never stops.
Yeah. I think we should say a little thank you to CNG, because they were part of that.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a lovely little copper coin that was known about. There's an example in the BM, and I think there's one example in the ANS. And they're always just slightly odd. They've got a big Brahmi letter on them. And we knew which king issued them, but they just didn't quite fit anything else. And CNG very kindly, 7 years ago, showed us a set of coins that they'd received in, which were all different, but all clearly in that style. And it was in that kind of moment where, like, oh, there's another mint that we didn't know about. These two coins were the only things that survived in the literature that represented it. And of course, with just two coins, you're not going to postulate an entire separate mint organization. So all sorts of people have helped us in that sort of way, of kind of sending us things and going, does this add something? And the answer is often yes. And sometimes you see things that there are coins of the last two Kushan emperors in the British Museum collection, and we did not know that until Gul Rahim had looked at the Taxila collection, and we knew what to look for. So it's
yes. I mean, I think Gul Rahim's contribution and Elizabeth Errington's contribution, these two sites were so important for understanding how the copper coinage is organised, and also the collectors. I mentioned Heinz Bonds, Pankaj Tandon, and Aman or Aman. Without their collections, we wouldn't have been able to do this work. And I think when the British Museum is a collection of collections. We have Masson, we have Cunningham, and so forth. And without those collectors, you couldn't do this work. And I know it's always nice for coins to have their exact provenance.
We should say something nice about the BM and that. Yeah. And the BM collection is also a very exceptional collection, and without that concentration, quite that density of material in one place. Yes. The physical act over the years by successive curators of organising and reorganising the BM collection has underpinned understanding the actual coinage. It's worth saying that public collections do that. Just the ordinary everyday stuff of this stuff has to be stored and you have to be able to find things, right? So putting things in an order, it underpins research,
Absolutely.
right? And the BM collection.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think this could have really happened anywhere except the BM.
I think you're right. I mean, the big sort of lacuna is what's north of in the north. So
Yeah.
What Lauren's doing, showing us coins being found in Uzbekistan, and I've got contacts in Tajikistan who's now showing me what's found there. They open up the picture because Cunningham and Masson were both collecting south of Hindu Kush, and we could come back in 10 years and write it again with that extra information. But no more catalogues. And so, the British Museum also, I think it's been really important, the support that Andrew Burnett and Philip Atwood and now Tom have given this project over the years. Has been absolutely vital for its success. Thank you. Anybody else want to say anything? Yes, good.
So I'm Nasir, and courtesy thank you to Sheldon for bringing me here, and good to know so many things. Although some of it's just gone over my head. I'm a Mughal collector, right? I've been collecting since 5 years. Can I just ask one question? Where did they actually origin, Kushan? What would you call them? Would you say that are they Central Asian, or would you call them South Asian, or because I've studied Greeks? I'm sorry, I may sound a bit weird, but I've read about
an important question, because we use the term the Kushans. Actually, it's a dynastic name, and it would be like us referring to the British as Tudors or Windsors. They are not the people; they are the king.
Right.
And they're kings of a very diverse empire, which reaches from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, down into India, and the heartland was called Tokaristan. What we tend to, as classicists, ex-classicists, call Bactria, is to the Kushans was Tokaristan, and it's named after the Tokhari, who were inhabitants there. But we don't know whether the Kushans ethnically were Tokhari, or there was a big migration from Western China by a group called the Darya-Ajir, landed in Afghanistan. Are they ethnically part of that, or are they some other? We don't know the answer.
Thank you.
Who they were. Any more? No? Okay, I think we'll call it a day, and thank everybody. Thank the Royal Asiatic Society and CNG, everybody here and everybody online, and everybody in that long list who contributed to this great book. Thank you very much.
Do we need to stop sharing on the right?